Nira rubbed her manipulating appendages together excitedly as she skittered down the halls of the Svant station, her insectoid legs making soft tip-taps as they landed on the stainless steel floor. Her two large emerald compound eyes drinking in all the information around her as she dodged another Kriarch, their lobster-like abdomens scraping against one another. They raised their mantis-esque bladed arms in an annoyed stance as she wiggled her antenna back at them in apology. She was in too much of a hurry to offer a proper apology. The new species was here to look at her work, and she needed to be prepared. Her mandibles clicked together as she thought about the new members of the galactic stage. Not unlike the Vero, they were mammalian. However, they were much smaller. The tops of their furry heads barely reached her people's lower stomach, right at the center of her grasping appendages, and yet she had heard that they were so dense that a warrior couldn't so much as budge them running full tilt. It was perplexing until she had heard that they had hailed from a Category 13 death world with 4.5 times the gravity of their own home world, the highest rating any planet that harbored sentient life had ever gotten. Sure, there was the Neutna, who hailed from a Category 8 death world, but they were still relatively normal. In fact, one of her colleagues had mentioned that their scientists had told them if their gravity was any higher, they would not have made it off their planet, and that it was difficult as it was to leave the atmosphere. But that wasn't the strangest thing about them. Nira had gotten her manipulators on a pamphlet describing their anatomy, something all the other members of the galactic community had reluctantly shared only after many rotations. Their anatomy was overbuilt, would be her descriptor. They had one head, a common trait among the community, but their brain was split into two hemispheres. They had 2 eyes, but their eyes themselves had 6 muscles that helped move their irises. Then there was their breathing system. They had a strange way of moving oxygen around their bodies, with these things called lungs, sacks of flesh that expanded and diffused oxygen into their bloodstream, which was iron-based instead of copper like herself, and needed far less oxygen than the Kriarchs themselves and many of the other species. In fact, their atmosphere only had 21% oxygen in it, 20% less than anyone else. It was insane, and made Nira's elongated head spin. She shook her head as she stopped in front of the red airlock she was meant to meet her guests at. She could think about their crazy anatomy later. Right now, she needed to focus on presenting her work. She was quite proud of it as well. "Vree should be nearly done showing them the lab. I should make a grand entrance." "Oh." Nira clacked her mandibles together loudly to get the attention of their guests and Vree. Vree turned first, her 9 eyes facing in all directions on top of her fuzzy body. The humans, she thinks they're called, turned afterwards and almost immediately jumped backwards, their eyes dilating to pinpoints. One of the 3 of them had placed an appendage at their hip, looking for something that wasn't there. That one had a thick bar of fur above their mouth, stark white and seemingly well-groomed. The fur atop his head was also white, smoothed back and glistening in the light of the planet below and the lights above.
"Fuck, it's a xenomorph,"
one of them whispered, their gruff voice not translating well through the translator. One of them had turned entirely white, a seemingly younger human with a green suit on. He kind of looked like a kronk leaf. His face was entirely hairless, while his head was adorned with bright gold fur, muttering to the one next to him. "Listen, if I get face-hugged, shoot me. Just fucking shoot me." The one wearing green muttered to the one in gray, their face bright green. The one being spoken to was swallowing hard and shaking, possibly a fear response. He had less hair than his older companion, but he had a small patch of fur on his chin and no fur on his head. Nira tilted her head and slowly clicked at them in a confused way, swiveling her elongated head almost entirely around before looking back at the humans. She hadn't known they could change color. Fascinating. "I do not know what a xenomorph is. I don't see anyone in the vicinity other than myself and my colleague here." She stated simply, watching their reaction. Their chests seemed to rise and fall slowly as they took a closer look at her. The older human with the fur above its mouth looking at her with predatory eyes, slowly gliding along her entire length, making her antenna stand on end. It wasn't a good sensation, and she was glad when it ended. "You're right, I apologize. You look very similar to a monster from one of our old horror movies, but you're very different." Nira rubbed her striking appendages together as she took several steps forward, towering over the humans. The young one in the green suit turned an even paler white as she did, taking several steps back himself. Strange. He could probably rip off her legs easily. "How so? I don't want this to impact the demonstration. If I can alleviate any misunderstanding, I will," she said, gesturing to the other two. The older human seemed much more calm now, stroking the hair above his lip and looking up at her as she spoke. "Well, to start, your head is tubular, which is very much like said species. Nothing you can do about that. Then there's your back. You have biomechanical tubes poking out at about the right spots like they do. And your carapace is nearly pitch black," he stated matter-of-factly, extending a small, grasping appendage as he counted off each similarity. Each one made the white human shake harder, his eyes never leaving her. "But you have mantis blade arms above your grasping appendages, and a more lobster-like lower half, as well as pretty large mandibles over your mouth. And you have eyes, which they don't have. So my own colleagues need to calm down and shape up." The human shouted that last line, more at his companions rather than at Nira, both of them snapping to a more upright position. He nodded and turned back to her, extending an appendage towards her own. "I'm sorry about our conduct. It was a knee-jerk reaction. We were given a briefing on who we would be meeting, but in all honesty, I wasn't paying much attention to anything other than the mention of stealth ships." He made this soft, strange chuffing sound as he looked up at her, seemingly waiting for something. She looked down at him and simply stared, absorbing this information. So, she was frightening to them, and couldn't really do anything about it. Unfortunate, but maybe she would get to see more of those fascinating reactions. "What are you doing with your appendage?" she asked, pointing to it with her own manipulators. The human looked down at his, then to her, and kept his appendage held right there. "It's a handshake. It's a formal greeting from my species." He grunted back, leaning forward and taking her manipulator in his hand. She assumed it was called the term handshake and moved it up and down. Like this. Nira slowly mimicked the movement until their appendages synced, the older human's lips curling up and showing his teeth. It made her antenna twitch again, pulling her manipulator back to herself. "Interesting. Well, I'm Nira, the head scientist of research and development here at the station. You're here for a demonstration of our newest stealth technology, aren't you?" She clicked coyly, watching them as she skipped right ahead to the beginning of the presentation. The older human's eyes narrowed as the two younger ones smoothed their suits, the one in green no longer a pale white, the one in gray a more pink color now.
"Yes, we are. Strange way to jump into the conversation,"
he growled, the translator still having trouble picking up his voice. "Don't be a grumpy bastard, Todd. She's a scientist, not a damn door-to-door salesman. The eggs head at home are just as awkward." The one in green bluntly told the older human, Todd, is what his name was apparently. Nira was loving all this new information she was getting about the humans. Todd slowly looked back at the man in green without emoting, a shit-eating grin plastered on the human in green as he grunted.
"Fair enough. Guess I should cut her some slack."
His chest expanded and shrank again before he flung his arm outward and gestured for Nira to move forward. Or she assumed so. It was quite similar to the Varro's gesture of get on with it.
"All right, lead the way, Miss Nira."
Nira excitedly turned and clicked twice towards Vree, who squealed back and hopped away. This was Nira's show, and Vree knew that. As she disappeared behind the airlock she had herself sauntered through, she turned towards the window and pulled out a data pad, tapping a few spots on its surface. "Well, it's a good thing we have this amazing view, isn't it? Great backdrop for some science," she exclaimed excitedly as 4 long ships started coming around the edge of the planet. They looked almost like spearheads with crescent wings sprouting from theory back ends. The sharp tips pointed towards the front, their silvery surface sparkling in the light of the planet. One of the humans made a high-pitched sound beside her as the ship grew closer. "Well, I'll give you this. Your vessels are beautiful." The human in gray muttered, eyes finally looking away from her as his eyes locked onto the ships. Todd seemed to stroke the fur above his lip again. Nero was starting to suspect it was a habit he had when he was thinking, and also appeared to be appreciating the ships. They slowly came to a stop several cricks away from the station, far enough away not to be affected by its gravitational pull. The grav generator did strange things to ships under a certain size when they got too close.
"But I'm not seeing much stealth,"
Todd grunted, turning to Nero with an expectant look. She bounced up and down in agreement, her flared tail slapping the ground with light thunks. "Yes, their stealth module's currently offline. I was hoping we could show off the rest of their abilities first. They are the first of their class built by my people, after all," she said mischievously. In all honesty, she just wanted to show off the work of her and her colleagues. They had all put their minds together for many rotations to make these ships, and that made her quite proud of her team.
"What other features are you going to show off? I thought this whole trip was to see your stealth modules, not to see you show off. I'm missing the BattleBot finale for this."
Todd turned towards the one in green who had seemingly struck a nerve, walking over with heavy clangs coming from the metal floor as his much denser body put more stress on it. "Jeremy, let the lady show off her toys. You're already here. You can't miss your stupid show anymore." He struck the back of Jeremy's head, a pop sound coming from the impact as Jeremy rubbed the spot, wincing in pain and seemingly making a face as Todd looked at the human in gray.
"Got anything to add, Walker?"
he growled, Walter shaking his head side to side hurriedly and raising his manipulating appendages up and waving them as well. "Nope, nothing, sir. I'd love to see the other features this lovely lady worked on," he answered back hurriedly, making Nira tilt her head curiously. These humans really were fascinating, and if she could, she'd study them all day. But she needed to continue. "Thank you, Todd. Well, we worked on quite a few things for these ships to do, like the new propulsion system." She tapped her appendage on her datapad, a buzzing coming from it as she connected her communicator to one of the ships outside, typing in something quickly. "Please move 30 cricks up at full speed." She let go of the button and watched as the furthest ship on the left's back end slowly turned downwards, almost swiveling like her own head. The ship shot upwards suddenly, getting up to 30 cricks in only a few minutes. Todd let out, the translator not quite knowing what to make of the noise. Nira turned and looked at him, her mandibles rubbing together as the ship came to a stop. "We've improved the movement speed, shortening the time from 8 time units to move 30 cricks to only 6 units. It was quite a bit of work. The gravitational force on the pilots was harsh until Vree was able to use a bit of her knowledge to improve the dampeners." Jeremy looked at Todd, who seemed to be silent, then to Walter, who was biting his lip with his teeth, another oddity of humans, but so was everyone's methods of eating. "You can't be serious," Jeremy seemed to say in utter disbelief. "What do you mean, Jeremy?" Nira asked, her emerald eyes shimmering as she also toned disbelief. The humans had to be impressed by this. She and her team had shaved 2 whole time units off their maneuvering time. "This isn't fast. It was like watching your ships move through molasses. Our ships would fly." Todd smacked Jeremy on the back of the head again, this time sounding much more painful. Even Nira flinched a bit as Jeremy hit the ground, and hard. "Don't be an asshole," was all Todd grunted, before clearing his throat and nodding to Nira for her to continue. She was picking up on cues much better now, she hoped. They were very similar to other species, just all mixed together. Well, she clicked, pushing the button on her datapad again, the buzz emanating from it again as she connected to another ship. She didn't say anything out loud, but she did send them a message. "We have our new plasma cannons," she shouted proudly, her clicks ending as the next ship in line's underside slowly lowered, a long barrel slowly extending outwards as a bright rainbow light shot forwards, smashing into a small asteroid 10 cricks wide. It became red hot, slag flaking off and entering the atmosphere of the planet below. they would safely burn up and dissipate. She had been pretty careful to have them target a smaller one. "Well, that was pretty cool," Walter said with a tight voice, nodding to himself. He raised an eyebrow as the barrel slowly folded in on itself and vanished back into the underside of the ship. "What, no encore?" Near gave him a disbelieving look, her mandibles spread apart and her blade-like appendages hanging down, the tips of them resting on the ground. "No, they need time to recharge. They use quite a bit of energy, and to use them too fast could have them melt your own ship." She pointed towards the not-so-shiny surface of the underside, some of the plating having been burned by the cannon. "Really? Really?" Jeremy commented, Todd giving him a scowl which shut him up very quickly. But this time Walter jumped into the conversation instead, continuing where he left off. "That's it? We could have blown that asteroid to smithereens, and then some with our ship. And we have a diplomatic ship. That's pretty Todd smacked him on the back of the head. Seemed there was also a habit of Todd's. These three must be very familiar with one another if they were so comfortable showing off their strength and willingness to use force around her. "If you say another word, I'm going to wax your entire body and make you go to your wedding that way," he muttered, Walter turning pale like Jeremy had earlier. You wouldn't." Todd's face was deadly serious as he spluttered. Walter quickly fell silent as Todd gestured for her to continue again. Nero was starting to think nothing was going to impress them. Well, besides the stealth modules, she hoped. I suppose we should continue," she clacked slowly, pushing the communications button yet again. This time, the next ship's wings slowly folded in on themselves until they were nothing but a spearhead floating in space. In a flash of light, the silvery form stretched like a rubber band until they disappeared. All that was left behind was a puff of silvery gas where it had been before. "Whoa, was that an FTL jump? I thought you couldn't jump that close because of the warp bubble." Walter, Jeremy, and even Todd seemed impressed this time. Each of their faces contorted into different expressions. Yes, that was the reaction Nira had been looking for. It was gloriously fascinating to examine their faces, the lines of their skin doing things her body simply never could. "You are correct. The warp bubbles usually would rip the ship apart if you were using any other FTL drive. But, implementing some of the same principles as our grav generator, we've managed to make short-distance jumps not only possible, but cost-effective." She tapped something into her data pad as a silvery shard flashed by the station, the ship that had just vanished reappearing a few cricks away from one of the others. Its wings folded back out as it maneuvered its way back into place. Another puff of silvery gas where it had appeared again. "That's actually amazing. We've been looking for something like that. The higher-ups have been complaining about needing to be halfway to the Kuiper belt before jumping out or in," Todd commented, his blue eyes gleaming with interest. Nira's antenna waved up and down happily as she rubbed her manipulating appendages together, a soft sh emanating from them as her carapace rubbed together. She had thought the plasma cannon would have been their favorite so far, but this was wonderful. "Yes, we are also looking for a solution to that problem. I'm happy to have finally caught your interest. I suppose we should get on to the main show then." She excitedly gilded her appendage upwards on the datapad, the ships shimmering as their stealth modules began to power up. Slowly they vanished from her view, front to back, their forms invisible to. "So, when were you going to activate the module? The ships got pretty flashy there for a moment," Todd asked merrily, shattering Nira's train of thought. She looked at Todd, a merry look on his face as he stared out the window. No, they couldn't see them. It shouldn't be possible. "Yeah, I can kind of see a slight shimmer around the ships now, though. Maybe they're powering up. Would make sense, probably draws a lot of power, or is heavy on the onboard computers." Jeremy had leaned towards Walter, his tone much more uplifted now, his appendages stuffed into some folds of cloth around his waist, as his eyes also stayed locked onto the spot the ships had been. "I don't know, but yeah, I see it too. Kind of like a thin layer of glass that's wobbling around the body. Kind of cool looking," Walter answered, his eyes following the same spot. Nero was in disbelief. The camouflage had been perfect. Even the high-yield scanning equipment hadn't spotted the ships when they had tested them. No, you must be playing a... What was it the pamphlet said? A prank on me? The ships have completely vanished. She clacked shakily, barely getting the words past her mandibles. What? No, they're right there. You've got to be kidding me, Todd said in disbelief, pointing out the window towards where the ships had vanished. Neera slowly typed into the data pad with her appendage, Todd's face frowning as his fingers slowly raised upwards following something she couldn't see. Doctor, please, we aren't fools. They're right there. Jeremy joined in, pointing at the same spot. Neera's head was spinning. Her carapace was tight, and she could barely see her surroundings. She collapsed onto the floor heavily, her body leaning against the cold wall as she looked at all three of the humans in front of her. The stealth modules are active. She turned the data pad, showing the status of the ships, pointing towards the green slider with her appendage. All three of their faces had the same expression, a slightly ajar mouth with squinting eyes.
No, there's no way. You're messing with us because I was an asshole, aren't you?
Jeremy stated furiously, throwing his hands up in the air. He was scowling now. It reminded her of Todd. Quite a lot, actually. He had the same folds of skin around his eyes when he scowled.
You're messing with us. You have to be. There's no way your stealth amounts to a shiny ship with a kind of cool shimmer. There's no fucking way I'm missing BattleBots for this shitty stealth.
He ranted as Neera slowly turned the sliders down. Todd and Walter watched intently as there was another flash and the ships came back into her view, back to front. Their magnificent hulls shimmering once again in the light, elegant and beautiful, hanging in the void above the planet like silver birds. I think she's serious, Jeremy. Walter butted into Jeremy's rant, shaking his shoulders rather roughly. Neera watched the muscles flex and move under the skin as he did, distracting herself with the strange movement for a moment while she tried to reconcile with this information. Her work for the past few rotations was useless. The humans saw them just as clearly as they did when the modules were off. You shouldn't be able to see them at all. We reduced the wavelength of light that reflects off the surface of our ships to the 450 nanocrick range. No one should be able to see them. Neera clacked nervously, checking her data pad. The ship's reflectors had indeed shortened the wavelengths to 430 nancircs, into the invisible range of color for every species on the Galactic Council. Except the humans, apparently. Todd gave her a small, comforting look before clapping his appendages together. All right, boys, so the stealth modules are a bust. There was always the chance they were going to be. Todd nodded as he also butted in, all three of them turning and looking towards him as he spoke. And spectacularly, that doesn't mean the trip was worthless. All three of them tilted their heads, Todd gesturing outside and giving a small smile. Ah, that's what it was called, Neera finally remembered. That FTL jump tech, it would make us far more difficult to hit, track. Hell, it would even give us an upper hand against 90% of the galaxy. But Todd, we came here for stealth tech. What would we tell the bigwigs at home? Oops, sorry guys, turns out we just have way too good eyesight. Their stealth sucks. Oh yeah, but see this FTL drive? Todd nodded, Neera simply watching at this point, messages starting to pile up on her data pad from the pilots outside, asking for coordinates to go or for something to do. That's exactly what we tell them. They have been looking for a better FTL drive anyway. So the stealth drive sucks. Boo fucking who. Since when have we ever had luck in our favor? Both of the other humans gave a bit of a smirk before they all began barking together. Or wait, was this laughter? Neera was going to assume it was laughter. Otherwise, these humans had just gone insane in front of her, which, given they could absolutely rip her apart, would be very bad news for her. Should we head to the negotiations chamber then? Neera clicked weakly, the three humans nodding at each other and helping her onto her many legs. Lead the way, Doctor. I'm sure we can work something out. Months later, General Krokna had not believed the report Neera had sent to him, calling her a liar and a dirty traitor. There was no way the ships that had made her so proud of the research and development team had been so utterly and completely useless against their greatest threat. She tried to explain that the human visual spectrum was so much wider than theirs. that reducing the wavelength like she had would do nothing to inhibit them. Krachna had simply screeched into her face when she lied. The entire galactic community couldn't see those ships. He forced her to resign, ordered a personal ship to be built for himself, and went to prove her a fool. He warped to the edge of this soul space to prove a point, that he was going to sneak past all of their detection methods from the very edge of their home system. So very confident he was unseen, undetected. He kept this confidence as he passed Neptune with no resistance, sending messages back to the Kriarch Council of his successful infiltration, constantly berating Nira's idiotic report. They must have been faking it, just an extremely lucky guess as to where the ships were. Ignoring that she had spent several rotations to make this stealth module, giving her no reason to lie, his confidence only grew as he glided past Saturn, again with no resistance. However, as he slowly approached Jupiter, he began to feel as if he was being watched. He could see slight shimmers at the edge of his vision as he grew closer to the massive gas giant, almost imperceptible. He could see much more activity here, a large metal ring slowly rotating around one of its moons. And then, without warning, he was promptly obliterated in a hail of explosions. His ship just pretty shrapnel floating around one of Sol's gas giants. The last word he heard moments before his death? We see you.